I think I've got everything set for Zoom. Now, did that desktop shortcut follow you, though, if you're at a different computer?
No.
So
Only things in your documents folder actually follow you.
Go back in Canvas on our home screen, and if you click down here on the instructor link to go back to that page that has my picture, you know, I try to get rid of that as soon as I could. Down here at the bottom is that Zoom URL, and you can just click on it because you're not going to take over this computer. It's going to use it. So you should be able to connect that way. Next week is that unit exam. We may have to work a little bit Monday on covering more of our content. So we might not be able to use that whole day for review. So just so you guys are aware. Go ahead and open your OneNote.
Where is the Zoom link?
On Canvas.
Where?
On the instructor.
Thank you.
Page. Did you find it? Down at the bottom.
Thank you.
Sure. So your OneNote notes, you want to probably start a new tab for looping. Our looping and if statement stuff is all smushed in chapter 3 of your book. And if you've been reading through that, I know there's a lot of material in there that is kind of off on a tangent, you could say. It's all great information to help you out, but there are some areas where they're not really as focused on learning as a brand new programmer. So that's why we have all these other resources available to you. I know it can get kind of crazy with all of it, though. So if you have your OneNote document open, I'm going to go ahead and open Visual Studio. And we're just going to do a few practice projects with some looping constructs in them. So today we really focus on while loops. We need to cover while loops and for loops. So they're a little bit different.
My OneNote isn't working.
What's it doing to you? Is it not finding your OneNote? Do File, Open, and then click on your Ozarks Technical Community College up at the top. And then you should be able to find, let me get mine open so I can show you. When you do File, Open, for mine, I would click over here on OneDrive, Ozarks Technical Community College. That's where we saved them. And then I would find my OneNote Notebooks folder. And in that OneNote Notebooks folder, you should find, do you see it? Is it there? Is it opening for you?
It says we couldn't open this section.
You may need to give it a second. It's slow.
Once I got that, I mean that
It's just slow when you've got a lot of stuff.
okay, thank you.
So that should work. All right, so let's create a new project. So it is still chapter 3. So let's do File, New Project. And for this project, I want to make sure, first of all, that I'm working with a console app, our .NET framework. You guys are working on a different computer, so you might have to wait for a second for it to load up your settings and things like that.
You might want to share.
Do what?
You're not sharing.
Is it not sharing?
Your sound is, though.
Is that better? You see it?
There we go.
Okay, great. So remember, we want to choose. We're over here on the left with Visual C#, and then the framework or template we're choosing is a console app using the .NET framework. Now, before I click OK, I want to check again the location that my project is going to be saved, because right now it's going to my C drive. Might not like that, so change yours to be where you would like it to go. Now we're going to name this solution CH3 for chapter 3, and let's call this while loops. Now I just changed the solution name, so I'm going to come up here to the project name, and let's, bless you, let's name this basic while. So I have two different names now on this create screen, one for my solution and one for the first project that I want to create inside that solution. Let's click OK, and it should create everything for us. Now, when we are working with Visual Studio in a Visual Studio project, we've seen already that we have that solution, our namespace statement, and we're having to delete that to go to REPL. That's one reason it's really good practice for you guys to go back and forth to get those kinds of things really in your head. But underneath our solution, we have our project. So far, we've always just worked with one project and one solution. Today, in order to prepare or to practice more while loops, we'll have multiple. So let's change our program.cs file name. So I'm going to right click on that and choose rename, or I could click again on it to go into rename mode, or press F2, or any of those ways to rename things in Windows. Let's name this one basic while. So I'm naming it just the same as my project so that I can find it a little easier. And I want to say yes, that I want it to rename everything that it encounters that is affected by that change. So looks good. I want to do some things. So let's put in our using, let's go ahead and create our using static system.console.
Do we not need the others?
We shouldn't need any of the others other than system.
What are the other ones for? Are they for other aspects of the program?
Other things that you would do. Okay. So you'll get a chance. We'll see some. Just different classes that have different functionality. So for this first program, let's create a while loop that's just going to run forever. And we can do that just by saying while true. Now in C#, a while statement is just like an if statement. I have the keyword while followed by a condition. The body of the while loop is going to be enclosed by the opening and closing curly braces, delimited by the opening and closing curly braces. If I only have one line of code in my while loop body, I don't need the curly braces. So let's do it that way, and I'm going to make this be a right line, and I'm going to make it say loop body. That's all I want it to say. Now I want to go ahead after my while loop, so I'm going to go down a few lines, and I'll put in a read line or read key. I'll hold that console screen open. But for this loop, we're not going to need that. Now, because I know that I'm creating an infinite loop here, right? This loop is never going to end. I'm going to do a save all before I run this program. Now, Visual Studio is pretty good about making sure that all of your changes get saved, even if you write some poor code that causes the system to crash. But whenever you're looping, it's really a good idea to just save often, because you can get into an infinite loop that Visual Studio might not be able to recover from. So you could potentially lose code changes. It doesn't happen as much as it used to, but it still can happen. So we want to save often. So I've saved now. I'm creating this evil infinite loop. Let's run it and do it. Now it's hard to tell, but it's just going forever and ever and ever, isn't it? Because we're never stopping. Now, because I have this infinite loop, I could look over here at this performance, these diagnostic tools, and normally I don't really have much impact on performance of the computer, right? Because we're writing little console-based programs. But you can tell that this infinite loop is using more and more memory as it runs, just to even have that console open. So we as a programmer can have a really big impact on the system and on performance overall when we do infinite loops like this. How can I make it stop?
Right in the break? No.
Well, right now, how can I make this stop? Yes, sir?
Control C.
Control C. And that's the best way. So anytime I'm in a console mode and I want to close it or get out of it or break out of it, Control C will always do that. We could probably close that console too. Now, the thing about that loop was it was in an I/O loop because it was outputting. So that's why Control C worked, because it was actually communicating with the console. Now, if the line of code inside here was some sort of math or something, where I was just adding some numbers repeatedly, it would be a lot harder to get it to stop because it would be CPU bound. It would just be using the processor over and over and over, and it would be a much harder loop to break out of. So those kinds of infinite loops can cause trouble. We don't usually do them on purpose, right? So that's why we always want to be aware that that kind of thing can happen. Now, in our loop, let's put a few other things. We'd like to break out of this at some point. So we can put a variable. Let's create a counter. I'll create an integer named count. I'll go ahead and start out with an initial value of 0. Now in our loop, let's output our count value and this message loop body. I think I want the count value first, so I'm going to use a parameter here. And then I'm going to say that I want to output the count. In order to make things really fun, I'd like to add to that counter as we go. So I can use the count plus plus operation. And that says, every time you execute this line of code, increment the count variable. So that's going to add 1 to that count variable. So let's run this now after we save. And see if our counter is actually incrementing. We should be able to tell more that we're in an infinite loop than we could with just that message. Oh, there it goes. Now we can see some things happening. Now you can see why that memory value is going up, because you're really, just that console window is using a lot of space with our worthless message that we're generating here. So in our while loop then, we just added to our counter every time our while loop gets executed. So we can see what's going on with our looping, right? That we're just getting a basic add to it every time. So let's leave this project as is. I want to create a new project. Now, we haven't done this before, so help each other. Click first on your solution in Solution Explorer, and on your solution, right-click and choose Add New Project. Now it looks like we're adding a whole new Visual Studio solution, but we're not. We're just adding a project within this solution. Now I want to give it a better name. So instead of Console App 1, let's call this one While Loop Sum. Now I'll call it While Loop Fun. Sorry, I keep changing my mind. All right, I have a couple of different things I'd like to try. Now again, I want to rename my program.cs to be easier to find. So I'm going to right click and rename and name this while loop fun. And yes, I want to rename everything. So this is just organizational stuff up here, but it can really make our lives easier or harder, kind of like hypergrade, right? So now I have a solution that has 2 projects in it. Each of these projects has their own .cs file. If we look at the solution in File Explorer, we should see 2 separate folders, one for each project. Let's check. I'm right-clicking on my solution. I'm going to choose Open Folder in File Explorer. And sure enough, now my solution file is still in that main folder, but now I have my basic while project folder and my while loop fun project folder. So they're separate inside there. If I wanted to copy this to a flash drive or something, I need to copy this whole solution, the chapter 3 while loops folder. Otherwise, I could break some of the linkage that's built into this project automatically by Visual Studio and get some weird errors when I try to open it on another machine. So make sure we keep everything together. So for our while loop fun, we'd like to write a program that just asks people what they like to do for fun. So let's start out with a prompt for our users. I'll make sure that I don't have to write that console statement each time by changing my usings. Whoops.
There was one time I couldn't get the using the static console system to work.
Yeah, and it's actually a really new capability. So it's only been around this version of C# and the last one. So if you're running with an older system too, you might not be able to use it.
I'm running with a newer system, but I think maybe I didn't have the right version.
Something in there. And you'll see in the REPL some weird comments because they actually made it start working while I was trying to create REPLs, which was made things work one time and then not work another time. But whenever we're using things like this that are newer, we might not even realize they're newer. But it is a newer capability. So when you're searching for things and you look at websites and other people's code, you won't see them leave out that console word very often. Most of the code you're going to see is going to have that console keyword in it because it's just been a little while, bless you, that we were able to get rid of that. Okay, so let's prompt our user. Let's write out something like, what would you like to do for fun? Now, remember that we're with other people. Let's read that. What do we want to read that into? Just a string, I guess. I'm not going to declare my string here. I'll go back up and declare it because I think that I want to make all of my variables up at the top. But I do want to put my read line statement in already. So I'll just call it answer. I'm going to get that answer from doing a read line statement. So let's declare our variables at the top. I need a string called answer. And when you're using C#, if you've noticed, you can use the lowercase s for a string or the uppercase S for a string. It'll make it a little bit different of a color because it's actually defining it differently in memory, but either way will work because it's just flexible for you.
What's the squiggly line under answer?
It hasn't been used yet, I think.
Oh.
So yeah, double not used. It says it's been used but never, or been assigned but never used. So it's just always helping us. So let's make sure that it's used and output it. We'll do another write statement, and this time I'll put in my \n and say you would like to, and then we'll output whatever it is that they said they would like to do, their answer. and I know hypergrade threw you guys for a loop, but you just have been doing such a great job. The ability to just look at this right statement and see what's going on at all is a huge accomplishment. So everybody just needs to remember there's always more to learn, but you've already learned a lot. So let's keep going. So here's our question. We're going to put this in a loop, but before we do, let's make sure it's working right. I'll go ahead and put a read key here at the end so that it stops for me. And I'll run it. Oops, that's not what I wanted. If you look over here at your Solution Explorer, you'll see the basic while is bold. That means that's the project that's going to run if I click the Start button. I would like to change that and run this while loop fun now. So I can right-click on my while loop fun project and choose the option to set as startup. There it is, right in the middle, set as startup project. Do you see it? It's got the gear. Now, once you've done that, you'll see it becomes bold, and that's the one that's going to run. I think we can just right-click and say that we want to run a project. But I usually just go ahead and change it so that we're getting all of our settings properly. What would you like to do for fun? I like to go swim. Let's say swim. You would like to swim. Okay, so that looks good. I don't see any errors. Things aren't squished up too bad against each other. I don't see any major typos. So I would like to make that into a loop. And the part that I want to loop is this part here that asks them what they'd like to do for fun and prints out the answer. So I'm going to put my while loop right there. Now I can put a while true, and then I'll put my opening curly brace. Now I want that closing curly brace before my read key because I don't want my read key to be part of my loop. I want it to only hold that console open once that loop is done. So now I should get this question forever. Let's try it. Oh, now I have an issue with my spacing, don't I? Take a look at them, see what you've got. So my question, what would you like to do for fun, needs to go to a new line. So I'm going to fix that. I'll put a \n at the beginning of it. Now I could make it be right lines before that and all that other stuff. I said that's better. Sometimes it's just easier to use the \n and control it completely. We don't do console programming too often for real, so this kind of formatting is not something that you have to do often. Okay, so it's working now. It's asking me what would you like to do for fun. Sleep. Napping is super fun. Nap. I can't think of anything else. I'm done. So my program is not giving me an option to stop. I don't like that. I'd like to be able to stop. Now, I heard someone say that from a while true, we could use a break statement to get out of that loop. Is that true?
Yes.
Everybody seen that?
But it's sloppy.
It's sloppy. We don't like it. So we're not going to do it that way because a break statement alters the normal flow of the program. It's like using a go-to. Now, there's another statement within a loop that we could use that does the same thing called continue. And continue doesn't break completely out of the if state or the while loop. It just takes you back up to the beginning of it and reevaluates the condition again. Both of those are bad. They both are like go-to statements that alter the flow of control of our program. And we don't want to do that. So what we're going to do instead is create a condition that we can control. So let's create a new variable. And we'll call this one try another. And I'm going to set this, whoops. I think I want to make that a Boolean. That's why I was setting it to true, huh? It just makes more sense. So my Boolean is going to be, would you like to try another question? And I'm going to set it to true. So now instead of saying while true here in my while condition, I could make my while condition be while try another. Now right now if I ran this, it would have the same exact impact as if I left that while true, because I'm not doing anything to change it, right? So let's create a sentinel value.
What's that?
What is that? It's a certain value. So we could say enter 99 to end our loop, or enter done. Since this one we're asking for a string, maybe we want them to say done when they're done. Does that seem like a good sentinel value? Sometimes our sentinel value might be -1, but it just depends on, you know, what we're doing, because we want to use a sentinel value that's not something that we would normally expect to be input. So I'll add that to my message. What would you like to do for fun? And then I'm going to have this message enter done to end. Now when I'm reading in their input, I don't really want to output the word done. So after reading in their answer within our while loop, let's add an if statement. So if our answer is done, we want to make our loop stop. So we can set our try another variable to false. Otherwise, with our else clause, we'll just write out their answer. So notice how it's going to flow. We're going to start out, try another is true. So our while condition will start out true. We're going to ask them, what would you like to do for fun? And are done to end. We're going to read in what they say. If the answer is done, we'll stop our loop. Otherwise, we'll output their answer. Does that look right? That should work. Let's try it. So I will say sleep, eat, I'm done. Now I'm sitting there because of my read key. So that's all right. It's all done. Everything's good. We controlled our loop really, really well there. And we got a sentinel to take care of it.
I thought it was always pronounced centennial, because I've seen that word elsewhere.
No, a centennial is something that's 100 years old. Like a sentinel is like a guard that stands by the door. And so that's kind of what they're saying here, is this is like a guard or a spot waiting to let you out of the loop. So I guess that's why they made it be called a sentinel, because they decided it was guarding your loop, or guarding your loop body. So looks good. We've got a good one here. Now in this particular program, we're not doing too much, but I'd like to show you how we could change it a little bit and make it a little more efficient. So let's save this one and let's create another new project. Now in this project, we are going to add some numbers together. So let's do add new project, and I want to name it while loop sum. To make my life easier, I'm going to rename my program.cs, and it would be while loop sum. So if I were trying to turn one of these .cs files into hypergrade, I would have to find this while loop sum CS file instead of program. You guys have been doing great at finding them and getting them turned into hypergrade. So you're so further along than a lot of other classes ever were. All right, so in this one, I've got a need here to allow users to enter a number, and I want to add them all up. And whenever they get to a certain number, or type in a certain number like -1, I want to stop adding them. For this program, we're going to do things just a little bit differently in controlling our loop so that we don't have to have that if statement inside of there and some of those things that we used. First of all, we're going to need a string to hold the user's number. And then I would like to have the same number in another variable. We'll call it int num. It's still the number the user entered, just in an integer format. Or do you want to let them enter doubles? Doubles or integers? Let's do integers for now, so we can always change it to doubles. Now I think that I would like to have a constant. We saw those last time when we were looking at those if statement pieces of code, but our book hasn't really made a huge deal out of it. But anytime we have a value that won't change in our program, we want to make it a constant string, and it really just uses memory more efficiently and doesn't set the variable up to be changed, so we can make our program more efficient. Plus, we don't want things like words and stuff down embedded within our code. We want those kinds of things declared in variables so that they could be managed and controlled, like up at the top of our code. So I'm going to create this constant string, and this one is going to be our sentinel value. So let's call it sentinel. Oops, whenever I make a constant variable, they like for it to be named in all uppercase.
Like in Python.
Like in Python, exactly. I'm going to say my sentinel value is -1. So now in the if statement, I can check to see if whatever the user types in matches sentinel instead of having this hard-coded -1 in my if statement. That's always better. Anytime I can keep from having something like that in my code, I'm better off. So I think that we have everything pretty well set. To start up our loop, we're going to say while the user's number that they've input is not equal to our sentinel value, we want to process this loop. Now it's upset with me. Why is that? User num is defined. What's it say? So what's that mean? I just need to give it a value? Because I'm trying to use it in this while loop without ever saying it has a value. And the compiler is like, I don't know, I don't think that's going to work well because you haven't given it a value and you want me to compare it to something. So let's set it equal to, we can make it be 0. And then it won't affect our sum. But we know it's not equal to that sentinel value, so our while loop should run.
Would it be okay if it's do an empty string?
Do what?
Would it be okay if that equals to an empty string?
Sure, let's do that. Now that's going to be a space. I could set it to a null value with the double quotes stuck together. Does it care?
No. Does it?
Does it? Should be okay.
Here it shouldn't because
It shouldn't match.
-1.
Right, and still won't equal. So we're okay as long as our logic is okay with that, then that's fine. And that's a great way to set it up. So we've got now our while loop started, and for our while loop, we're going to prompt the user to enter a number, and we have an initial value set up. But you know, with programming, there's actually a better way. So let's do a priming read. So a priming read is where I write out a message to a user, not like that. There it goes. And say something like, please enter an integer.
Oops.
What's it mad about my rights for?
No, that's that.
We don't have our using static. So it's making everything mad. Okay, perfect. So what do I want to do in a priming read? Well, I want to read that first number from the user. So I'm going to set our user num equal to whatever they type in, our read line. So I got an extra. Sometimes it's popping those in for me and sometimes not. Now that's going to give me an initial read. So I really don't need to worry about giving this user num an initial value, do I? Because my priming read is going to take care of that. Now I'll show you in a second why that's so important, and you'll see, because it starts out giving us a little bit of duplicate code, but it's worth it. So now when I start my while loop, we know we already have a number, right? A number that's been typed in. We want to convert that to an integer. So let's put in our int num variable, and let's set it equal to just a standard convert to int32 of our user num string. Now we know right now we could make the program cancel. We could have a runtime error if we typed in invalid data doing it this way. But for now, I don't want to get into validating that at this point, and we'll add it in just a second. So we're going to say convert that number to an integer. Let's create a variable to hold our sum. Notice I'm jumping back and forth. And I do want to start out with my sum equal to 0, because then I can just use this shortcut syntax, plus equal. So I can say sum plus equal int num, and that's going to add int num to whatever value sum currently has. So that's the same as saying sum equal sum plus int num, just a shortcut. So now our sum is being properly incremented. Do we want to write out that number? Let's do it. I'm going to do it right after we convert it. Let's put a write statement in. We'll add in their number to our sum. Now when we're all done with our loop, we want to print out the value of our final sum. So I want to find the point in my code where my while loop has ended. I'm going to find that closing curly brace and label it end of while loop. Could go ahead and label the rest of my closing curly braces. The next one down is the end of my main method. The next one after that is the end of the class. The next one after that is the end of the solution. So I want to put some code after that while loop, but still within my main method. So I need it right there in between those curly braces. So let's write out. I'll start out with a new line and say the sum of the values is, and we'll put it as parameter. Now, after I output that sum, I want to do a read of some sort to pause that console, make sure I've got some chance to see my output. So I think we have a problem. Let's run it and see what you think the problem is. Oops, first of all, I need to make this the startup project. That would be my first problem. So while loop sum, I want that to be startup project. Run it. Please enter an integer. Do 5. Oops.
Mine's in the queue.
Still kind of an infinite loop, isn't it? It's not ever ending. What's our problem? We didn't mean to do that.
Is there plus missing somewhere? No.
We read an integer before we started our while loop. Do we need to read an integer at the end of our while loop now to keep going?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are not giving them a chance to enter in that sentinel value. Now, before I copy this code, though, I want to put that information in this right. So please enter an integer. Then within parentheses, I'm going to say enter is to quit, and then I want to replace that 0 with our sentinel value. So now our prompt is going to say, please enter an integer, enter -1 to quit, or whatever our sentinel value is. Now we're ready to copy that. So I want to copy these 3 lines, the right, copy, and I'm going to put those at the end of my while loop, still within my while loop. So before the end of the while loop, curly braces. So now I have some duplicate code because I'm prompting them for a number before our loop starts, and then I'm prompting them for a number every time our loop runs.
Like in Python, can you nest a while loop within like an if statement so that it will go up and then you don't have to have duplicate code? Or
But we want it this way.
Oh.
Show you why. Okay, let's run it. Okay, so let's enter an integer. 6. Enter an integer. Oops, I've got a new line problem there. I'll keep going though. I'll put in 5, 3, 2, 5, 6, 7. Now I should finally be able to enter -1, and it should exit out of our loop and everything be fine and hunky-dory. Now I'm going to leave this up so everybody can get it. I want to put in my \n. Now we're going to pick this one up next time where we left off here. So make sure you've got it. Now, the reason that we're doing a priming read is because if you notice, even though we have a duplication, which we won't once we put things into subprograms, right? We would just call the same write read subprogram over and over. But now we don't have to have that if statement logic inside our loop, because the last thing we're doing in our loop is reading a new value. The first thing we're doing is testing it. So we're just going to be able to nicely execute that loop without any sort of problem. Now, as everybody's working, make sure it's working the way we want, that you're getting everything just the way it should be, that you're getting some output as you go. Now, again, you should have 3 or 4 projects, 3 exactly, in your solution. Any problems, any questions with it? The Zoom session video, don't forget, will be available. So you'll want to make sure and take a look at it if you have any sort of problems. Now, if everybody's got it, everybody's acting like they do, let's go ahead and make this just a little bit more. So I want to make it to where I can validate my user's input. So right now I'm just doing this straight convert to int32. Well, we learned last week that's not very good, is it? And so what I want to do instead is a try parse. And last time we were doing try parses with an if statement. What if we do a try parse with our while statement? And we say while I am not able to do a try parse on this user num that I want to output to int num. I can say something about it being invalid data, huh? Let me get my curly braces all lined up here. I got a mess. There it is. So I want to write something like invalid integer. Please try again. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can do this. I made it a while. It make it kind of ugly. Let's turn it back into an if. I want you to really think about it because there's so many different ways you can handle these kinds of things. But I want to turn it into an if, and my else is going to be do the rest of this stuff in this while loop, like add to the sum. So let me cut this and paste it, and then you'll be able to see it. So now I've said, while my user number is not equal the sentinel value, the first thing I'm going to do in my while loop is check to see if the input is valid. If it isn't, I'm going to give them a message. If it is, I'm going to add it to our sum. Either way, though, I'm going to prompt them now for another integer and read it in. Now, the next time I start that while loop, first thing I'm going to do is check to see if their input is valid. If it is, I'll use it. If it isn't, I'll give them a message. So I'm going to be able to continually prompt them for input without any sort of convoluted logic or break statements or anything like that. And I can just handle it all very, very well. So let's test it, make sure it works. 5, 3, 6, whatever. Try some different numbers. Type your -1. Your loop should end, everything being all nice and clean. Great. Now let's try some invalid input. Invalid integer, please try again. Type in a number and it gets added. So it's all working really well. And if you try some different things when you move things around, you'll see how you can get yourself kind of trapped up against a corner. You're back in a corner. So for me, whenever I see a break or a continue statement or a whole bunch of convoluted logic, I know that that programmer worked themselves back into a corner and they're fighting to get out of it. They've got a problem they don't know how to get out. And it's usually a logic issue someplace else. So we always want to be careful with that. If we get to a point where we're trying to use a break statement or a continue statement, step back and reevaluate and see what is controlling that loop and how you can control it a little bit better. But that is really, really a good one for us for now. So let's save that. Next time we'll look at the for loops. Do start in the REPL. The way I would expect the class to work is, on Monday of a week, everybody's getting started with everything. taking a look at the REPLs and stuff by Wednesday. We want all those done. So remember, we don't wait until Tuesday to do the assignment. That should have been done last week, like over the weekend and stuff, so that you could ask for help instead of getting all into a big bind. So just like working yourself into a corner with a while loop, if you worked yourself into a corner with this one, evaluate your schedule and decide how you can get things done a little bit earlier so you have an opportunity to reach out for help if you need it. Because if you wait until the end, the help is not necessarily always there. So great job, great job. Just be super proud of yourself. Remember, you don't learn a new language in a day. This is a new language. I haven't ever learned a new language. Some people have. I know. Got it. Questions? Questions? Get out of here then. Have a great weekend.